Ziad's on the line already from Michigan in the United States. He wants to answer my question. Who is really behind Jaish al-Fatah? Ziad, go ahead, sir.
Jaish al-Fatah, George, as you probably know, was announced in a communique on March 24th, 2015, and it's an organization and a coalition made up of 7 different terrorist groups, the main one being Al-Qaeda, which goes by the name or the moniker of Jabhat al-Nusra in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It is Al-Qaeda. It already declares allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who is their leader, and we think he's their leader. He might have been killed some years ago, but he appeared on Al Jazeera last Wednesday in an interview where he tried to sort of soft soap the message of Al-Qaeda by making it sound as though they are not a globalist terrorist network. The fact of the matter is there are 7 organizations. 2 of them are big, Ahrar al-Sham and Jabhat al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda, and they represent approximately, some people have estimated 60,000 troops, all being directed right now by Americans, Turkish officers, British officers in Adana and Gaziantep, and also in Shirlik at the big base there, the NATO base. And the Syrian military intelligence is constantly collecting evidence showing that the Turks, the British, and the Americans are complicit in directing their assaults on the Syrian
your vice president rather unwisely declared that in public at Harvard University just some months ago.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. He admitted that Saudi Arabia was, in fact, the Arabians of the peninsula were financing these terrorists.
And Turkey was facilitating.
They apologized for it after it was called on the carpet. Yeah.
Now, Ziad, this is what they used to call in the United States, long before you were born, the $64,000 question.
Oh no, I'm 64 years old.
Okay, you just sound young. Now, Ziad, we're really, I mean, George Orwell couldn't make this up. The United States, which was attacked by Al-Qaeda, which had the Twin Towers demolished in front of all of our eyes, and which lost thousands of its citizens, murdered by Al-Qaeda, now has its officers in Syria coordinating the military effort of Al-Qaeda. Do you have any politicians in the United States? Do you have any media in the United States? Is there anyone with a brain and a pen or a typewriter in the United States that might bring this extraordinary news to the attention of the people of the United States or not?
Americans, by and large, are like Roman citizens. You give them bread and you give them games. And until they're directly affected by something, then they, generally speaking, act in a very bovine sort of way. Ovine, almost.
So they don't know and don't want to know that the people who attacked the United States on 9/11 are now not just your allies, but that your officers and my country's officers are actually in the front line directing these people?
Absolutely in cahoots with them, yes. Their operations are planned by the Turks, the British, and the Americans in the north of Syria. The attack on Idlib and Jisr al-Shughur and Ariha all were conducted under the control and the supervision of the Turkish officers who were actually seen. There was Turkish artillery fired at the Syrian army. We know for a fact that in Qasab, which is in the Latakia province, that Turks were visibly, observed, directing artillery against Syrian forces during the time when they were trying to recapture Qasab. The involvement of NATO is open and obvious. There is no one in any trial, any court of law, and I'm an attorney, I've been an attorney for 35 years, I can prove the complicity of Britain and the United States and Turkey in this outrageous war crime with great ease. And I have the documents to prove it, and I think probably if you look in the internet and the various news sources, the evidence is extremely obvious.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, Ziad, but a case collapsed in the English courts this very week where a man was about to be tried. He was about to appear in court. He was, I think, in the holding cell, about to come up into the dock, charged with serious terrorist offenses, when the Crown, that is the state here, abandoned the case with the jury assembled and the judge in his place, his wig powdered. They abandoned the case because the man's defense was that he was working for exactly the terrorist organizations in Syria that the British government was arming and financing, and that he was ready to blow the entire picture in front of the press and the public, the jury and the court system, at which point the case was abandoned and the man has gone free. Now, this is Alice in Wonderland. The British and American governments protest how anti-terrorist they are. They arrest people for even going with aid and coming back to Britain on terrorism charges, whilst they are themselves financing, arming, organizing, tactically advising, strategically inspiring these very same terrorist organizations. What's it all about? What's the end game, Ziad?
What's that? The end game?
Yeah, what's the end game?
The end game is you don't want to get Russia to believe that the red line has been crossed in the north of Syria, because that will be the ultimate end game. Putin has made it very clear to Obama, and Obama understands this, that Russia views American intervention in Syria as an intervention in Russia, that is an attack on Moscow. And even their defense minister, General Shigoi, was in Washington, told Martin Dempsey exactly the same thing, that there's a red line to be crossed. Right now, we are very close to it, because as you see, Iran has begun sending troops now via Latakia into the battle in Idlib and, of course, in northern Latakia.
Well, why not? Why not? If everyone else is, why shouldn't Iran? Why shouldn't Russia?
The Russians are extremely legalistic about this. They want to play the game according to the international law. They've been very strict about following rules, the UN Charter. For example, in the way they annexed Crimea was extremely legalistic, and it's very hard to attack the way they did, in fact, annex Crimea. Ukraine, another example. The Russian army, as you know, could literally wipe out the Ukrainian army probably in 8 hours.
Yeah.
And yet they have not done that. They are not going to do that because they are following the rules. And the same is true in Syria. The Russians have agreed with the United States after the deal was made about Syria's chemical weapons that neither side would intervene directly in the conflict there. So Obama finds that very comforting. He can now use his proxies to do exactly what he wants, while the Russians are being very legalistic about taking the matter to the United Nations. At some point in time, Mr. Putin is going to have to he's going to have his feathers ruffled a little bit, and he's going to have to take some steps towards equalizing the situation.
But let me ask you one last question. You've been very helpful. The last question is this. Given the dynamics on the ground, it cannot be ruled out at all that the regime in Damascus will fall and that these people will be in power. How is that in the interests of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel next door? How?
Two reasons. One is that the U.S. is committed to helping Saudi Arabia and Qatar to develop a Sunni buffer state between Iraq and Syria, as you said very perspicaciously earlier. The idea here is not just merely to distance Iran from Hezbollah and Lebanon, but also to create an area where the gas pipeline, which is just an obsessive point with the Qataris, can be extended through to Tartus in Syria for then transport to Europe. The Qataris, their entire life and existence depends on natural gas. They know that if Iran is able to extend that gas pipeline through Iraq to Syria, they're finished in the long haul. So, as a matter of fact, the United States is not only interested in protecting Israel, but also interested in keeping Iran away economically, preventing Iran from expanding its influence, and certainly preventing Iran from arming both Syria and Lebanon and giving them the kind of tactical depth, strategic depth they really need.
Ziad, if I ever need an attorney in Michigan, you're definitely the man I'm going to hire. Thanks for that, helping the case for the prosecution